Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. Listen to this. That, in case you were curious, was the opening of the first piano concerto by Prokofiev, very much in the key of D-flat major. So welcome to the fifth in our series of talks on the emotional qualities, if any, of different keys, key signatures, tonalities, whatever you want to call them. We've gotten through all the C's and we're heading toward the D's. Now, of course, D-flat major, course, is the same as C-sharp major. But C-sharp major does not get used. It gets used even less than D-flat major. One of the reasons is because of the way it's notated. C-sharp major has 7 sharps in its key signature, whereas D-flat major has only 5 flats, even though they're the same notes. It's all just a function of how you write it down. And so that means that you will very, very, very seldom see C-sharp major being used as a named key signature of a work, whereas D-flat major occurs once in a while, but still very rarely. You may be curious as to why. Why is it that these keys with lots of sharps and flats don't get used so much? Well, the simple reason is because back in the day, when players were far less accomplished than they are now, and concerts were given basically on one rehearsal, you could not expect, particularly string players, to be able to play a work that had all kinds of what we call accidentals, that is, sharps and flats, the black keys on the piano, more or less. It would have just been too difficult for them to read. and so, especially when most of the music was new and they couldn't possibly be expected to know it in any depth, they just had to sit there and sight read it. And so composers naturally gravitated toward the keys which were easiest for the players to play. And that precluded keys with lots of sharps and flats. So the music that we're going to hear in D-flat major was only written in the late Romantic and 20th century. The late 19th century and 20th centuries, because that was the first time you had musicians who could be expected to play in those keys. So that begs the question then of what possible special quality can the key of D-flat major have? And it's a very interesting one because some of the normal keys, C major, and after this comes D major. Oy vey, have I got D major? Oh my God. They're very, very common. But the ones that are less common will only have acquired their particular characteristics if they were acquired instead of inherent. That's one of our sort of challenging questions. If the nature of the emotional quality of a key is inherent, it doesn't matter when you used it. But if it was acquired, then it will have been somewhat relatively kind of new. And it'll be interesting to see if there is a consistent emotional characteristic associated with this particular key. And in fact, I believe there is. I don't know if you found the opening of that piano concerto in any way kind of curious I always did. I remember the first time I heard it. Now, it could just be Prokofiev, it could be the nature of the melody, it could be all kinds of things, and the accompanying harmonies. Because one of the problems with modern music is that it's harmonically very adventurous and unstable. So you can't say it's going to be in a key like a classical work by, say, Haydn or Mozart. It's going to be all over the place. And so the key may have less of a chance to assert its particular characteristics over the course of the work. But I do think that opening sounds somehow, there's something curious about it. I'm not quite sure what that quality is, but it definitely, I think if you were to transpose it and play it in like normal C major, it just wouldn't sound quite the same. I mean, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I could actually get software that will transpose it into C major and we could find out. But I have a better way of doing it. Because my first theory about D flat major, this unusual key, is that it's because it's an unusual key, composers who employ it write unusual music. That is, music that somehow sounds other in some way, some special way. It has a separateness about it. And I wanted to, let's see if I have a couple of examples that may prove it, because I've got a couple symphonies here that are actually in D flat major. One of them, and this one that's quite popular, well known, is Howard Hanson's Romantic Symphony. It's in D flat major, and it is a work that has melodies and a sense of it being, well, spacey, space music. I mean, here, listen to the opening of the first movement when the allegro gets hopping here. I mean, that's Star Wars, right? It's absolute sci-fi adventure movie music. And it's in D flat major, which is really quite unusual. Of course, the big tune, the big yummy romantic tune, is not so much in D flat major. But that music is, the space music is in D flat major, and it does give a feeling of kind of, zipping around the universe on your spaceship, perhaps. Or if that doesn't work, how about this example? This is a wonderful piece, by the way. This is Swedish composer Ture Rangstöm. There he is, Ture Rangstöm. He was really a good composer of yummy, colorful orchestral music, and his third symphony, which is in one movement, is called Song Under the Stars. Ooh, romantic, mystical, impressionistic, spacey, music-y type stuff. And that's what it is. It's rather similar to the Hanson, actually, when you think about it. And let's listen to the opening of Rangstöm's Third Symphony. You'll see exactly what I mean. You'll hear exactly what I'm talking about. That was the Norrköping Symphony Orchestra under Mikhail Jurovsky, or whatever you want to call him, on CPO. But what a lovely work. Go listen to the rest of it. You're going to love it. And it comes on this series. You may have to get all four of them, but they're lovely pieces. And the Fourth Symphony is so much fun. The Invocatio for organ and orchestra, we used a movement of it on my Earquake disc on Undine, the disc I produced that has the world's loudest classical music. Rangstöm was a passionate, fiery, romantic type who was hugely influenced by literary sources and texts, and Song Under the Stars speaks for itself. The music has a similar kind of spacey, mystical, very romantic quality about it. And I think D-flat major was chosen because it conveys that feeling of otherness, of specialness. And, it may or may not be inherent in the key of D-flat major, but if composers use a key to do certain things over and over and over again, then those things tend to be associated with that particular key. And the idea of D-flat major as a way of separating something out, as a way of making something, its own special little universe. The universe of D-flat major is actually older than these 20th century composers, although not a lot older. One of the most wonderful uses of D-flat major occurs at the beginning of Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto. Yes! That was Sviatoslav Richter and Karl Ancherl on Supraphon. That tune, that big tune, is in D-flat major. See, D-flat major is the relative major of B-flat minor, which is the key of Tchaikovsky's piano concerto, right? Isn't it B-flat minor? Yeah, B-flat minor. The relative major means it's exactly the same scale. It just starts at a different point so that the intervals between the notes make a major scale instead of a minor scale. And Tchaikovsky, genius that he was, found that if he put that enormous, gorgeous, succulent, luscious, wonderful tune in D-flat major, it would sound even more special and separate and independent. And people who some people are down on this concerto because they say, well, that tune has nothing to do with the rest of the concerto. It's completely unrelated. Well, that's the point. I mean, Tchaikovsky wasn't an idiot. That was the point. He wanted it to stand out as a thing totally apart. In fact, in terms of the motives that make up that tune, the rest of the concerto derives quite a bit of its thematic material from that theme. But its initial statement is quite different, is quite separate. However, there's always a however, the slow movement of this concerto, that beautiful, sweet, slow movement with that gorgeous tune, ya, da, 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 ya, da, 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 ba, da. Remember that? That's in D-flat major too. So it comes back. D-flat major has a character of its own that infects this concerto and that gives it some of its special qualities. No question about it. No question about it. And so rather than simply saying D-flat major has its own inherent emotional character of otherness or spaciness or simply separate, special, whatever, it's also worthwhile considering the role that D-flat major plays in pieces that are not nominally in D-flat major, or that are, but only in a kind of clever or slanty kind of way, indirectly in D-flat major, because it really does give the music a particularly special quality. One of the absolute genius uses of the key of D-flat major occurs in Dvořák's Scherzo Capriccioso, a fabulous, underrated work. It's so brilliant and marvelous. The opening is in, I think, B-flat, and it takes a while, a minute before the orchestra figures out that it's supposed to be in D-flat. But when it gets to D-flat, at the big eruption of the main theme with cymbals and bass drum, you'll hear it. I'm going to play it for you. All of a sudden, it's in D-flat, and it sounds like, oh, okay, how did we get there? Where did that come from? Because the orchestra sort of falls into it, providentially, as it turns out. So let's listen to the opening of the Scherzo Capriccioso up to the first big eruption in D-flat major. It doesn't begin there, but it winds up there. And the way it does is quite surprising and full of actually high spirits. That's what makes it a scherzo. It's a bit of a joke. It's quite amusing. Have a listen. That was the Naxos recording with Zdeněk Kozler. But did you hear how when it finally came to the big tune with the full orchestra, all of a sudden it's pounding away in a key that doesn't seem terribly related to what's happened before. And of course, Dvořák allows that introduction to ask a lot of questions. All the little instruments are saying, gee, what key are we in? Where is this going? What's it doing? That horn can't possibly be right. And it isn't. The right key is, in fact, D-flat major. And that gives the whole piece its wonderfully special character. But I think on a much larger scale than Dvořák's, but the principle is similar, as with the Tchaikovsky. Perhaps the most telling use of the key of D-flat major is the finale of Mahler's Ninth Symphony, because the symphony itself is organized around the key of D major, regular, normal D major. And there's, some people have written about it and said, well, it goes down half a step to D flat, and that gives the whole movement a more resigned character, a feeling of relaxation. Actually, I don't think that's true. And I only tested it in doing this talk. It really kind of surprised me, because what I did, and what you're going to hear, is I took the opening of the first movement, and I took a clip of it, the D major bit, the opening theme, and then I put in a little pause and put in the main theme of the Adagio, the finale, right afterwards. And to my enormous surprise, it did not sound as though the music were somehow more resigned or more relaxed or more world-weary or more, I don't know what people expected. Partly it's that the opening theme is this ya-da, da-da, ya-da-da, that descending, those two descending motives at the beginning, the four notes. And people sort of suggest that, well, going from D to D flat is also in the same direction, although not as far. And you might expect it to somehow sound, I don't know the way they describe it, but the truth of the matter is, when you put them right next to each other, the finale sounds somehow more luminous. It supports the idea of D flat as elsewhere, someplace special, something extraordinary, unusual. That it accomplishes in this context. I don't think that there is this feeling of resignation. Of course, the whole movement, it ends in like death. So yes, there is a certain resignation there too. But it's one of those things where we can't let our theory get ahead of what the music actually sounds like, because the music itself is quite purposeful as it flows on, for at least initially, in its D flat major main tune. It's purposeful and passionate, and it has a tremendous thirst for life. I mean, it's not like all about death. It's not a funeral march. It's not funereal sounding. It's a love song almost. So I think the luminous quality, when you contrast D flat major to straight old plain D major, is probably closer to what Mahler was getting at. And that's what I hear. Anyway, I want you to hear this example and see if you don't agree. It was very, very surprising and interesting to me. This is Carol Anschel with the Czech Philharmonic on Supraphon. Did you hear what I was talking about? How when that finale comes in, somehow it all seems as though it's almost outlined with like a highlighter. It has a glow. So maybe D flat major, the key, glows. It makes the music glow. It illuminates it from within somehow. I don't know. Does it? I think that's something that every listener will decide for themselves. I can't say. I can only play the music and ask you to listen and see what you think of it. But there's no question that because D flat major is such an unusual key, either composers reserved it for unusual music, or alternately, it has some quality of unusualness that suits the music that the composers reserved for it. It's a chicken or the egg argument. I don't think there's any one particular answer. I don't think there is any answer, actually. There's only what our ears and our imaginations tell us. So, I don't know, I found this very interesting. I was dreading doing D flat major because I thought, oh God, what's in D flat major besides the finale of Mahler's Ninth? Turns out quite a bit. And turns out that the things that are have an odd kind of unity about them. I was completely surprised. It was a total voyage of discovery for me to arrive in D-flat Majorville. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, because I think this is just fascinating. And the next one is going to be just plain old D major, which is a whole universe of its own in many different ways. That's going to be a project. But in the meantime, let's enjoy our D-flats, shall we? Keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.